Hey guys, it's Trevy the Great here at long last with another Warhammer Fantasy Battle Report. Sorry I haven't been getting these out too consistently. This just recently has been really busy for me, and I just have not had time to play a lot of good games of Fantasy or 40k. So again, sorry about that guys, but here I am again with a Warhammer Fantasy Battle Report. This week is going to be Beastmen versus my old nemesis Lizardmen. These are actually my Lizardmen army is my personal Lizardmen army, and my friend was using it because he just got back from a trip and he did not really have time to put together an army of his own. So I wrote him a list, 2250 points, and put together an army for him, and that has in it 2 units of 25, I believe, Saurus. They're being run in 4 ranks of 6 with one little guy on the end. A big unit of 24 Temple Guard with a Slan in it. The Slan's got a bunch of crazy magic. He's got the Focused Rumination, Focus of Mystery, and I believe Soul of Stone for that reroll on the miscast table. And then we have 2 units of 10 Skinks, normal Skinks, not Skirmishers, with Musicians. I really love my little units of 10 Skinks because they are so good at just hampering enemies. They're not as expensive as Skirmishers, but they have just about the same flexibility. They can't march and shoot, but they have their little javelins, which you don't get the movement penalties on anyway. So, you know, whatever. I guess it's 6 of one, half done of the other, but I really like my skin cohorts. Anyway, on to my personal army, my Beastmen coming out again. This is my big Minotaur list, added a couple points from the 2,000 point list just to bring it up to 2250. It's got, as usual, 2 units of 40 Gores with additional hand weapons and full command, 2 units of Minotaurs with additional hand weapons, the big ol' BSB in one of those, and then a Doom Bolt in the other one with the Brass Cleaver. I have a Beast Lord. He's got the Steel Claws and the Talisman of Preservation. And then I have one level 1 wizard, 1 level 2 wizard there in that little Ungor Raider unit in the back. And I believe that is all for my army. As you can see, we're just playing a normal Battle Lines game because I'm terrified of scenarios. And we call all of those buildings impassable terrain just because we figured our units were probably too big to go in them anyway. And then the forest in the center was a mysterious forest, but that didn't really come into play, so we didn't give it much thought. And real quick, something I forgot to mention, my opponent also had an Ancient Stegodon with a Skink with a War Spear on its back, and a Scar Veteran with a Sword of Battle. They were sort of off in the corner, so I sort of missed them. They're off on the top right-hand corner of the picture right now. So here you go. I took first turn. As you can see, I've just sort of moved my army up to get into grips with the units that I think that they would do best against. As you can see, my opponent's put his 2 Saurus units sort of in the middle there, and his Temple Guard out on the that would be his left flank. I was sort of surprised by this. I expected him to put his Temple Guard in the middle, considering they had the Slan in them, and he's both the Army General and the Battle Standard Bearer, so he can really boost the leadership of those Saurus units, and he could have used that piece of impassable terrain there, the little house, to anchor his flanks. He's got outside of the picture, he's got his Stegodon and his Scar Veteran out on the left of his Saurus there. They're off picture right now. So here you go. As you can see, my opponent's moving up a little bit in response to my move. He's moving a Saurus blocks, which I was a little surprised with, considering he's got a lot of defensive options with those units. But I guess he's just sort of trying to bait my Minotaurs into charging, because those Saurus with their spears, they have a lot of attacks, and they can do some serious damage to only the toughness 4 Minotaurs with light armor, because he'd be wounding me on 4s and I would get no saves whatsoever. So the first turn was really boring, so I decided to skip ahead to the second turn right here without much commentary. This is, I believe, the end of my second turn. As you can see, there's been a lot of posturing and things with these Gore blocks. That Ancient Stegodon and the Scar Veteran are threatening to attack those and do some serious damage, considering the Ancient Stegodon is going to get 2d6 impact hits plus its attacks plus the d6 Thunder Stomp against those. But I think it's a fair trade if I can hold those 2 very expensive units. The Ancient Stegodon is almost 400 points. If I can hold those up with that unit of Gores for most of the game, then that's a win for me. As you can see, my Minotaurs with the Doom Bolt have charged up. Unfortunately, my opponent rolled pretty abysmally for his attacks and missed with a lot of them. So I didn't actually end up losing any Minotaurs at all. I killed most of his unit, and I overran, I believe, the maximum amount the Minotaurs can overrun. Unfortunately, that's not very much, considering they can only overrun d6 inches. But thankfully, that brought me out of a flank charge range of that other Saurus unit. So they are safe for now. Unfortunately, they can't really do anything but try to chase down those Saurus over there. Although I guess that works out for me because Saurus are very expensive units, so that'll get me a tidy bit of victory points. Here we go. Here's my opponent's turn 2. I believe this is sort of midway through it. As you can see, he's actually charged that Gore unit with his skinks, because we did find out that if you declare charges, you resolve them in the order you declare them. So his skinks were in the way of his Saurus charging my Minotaurs. So he decided to charge the skinks in to get them out of the way of the Saurus, which I thought was interesting, which was a tactic I never really considered before. Would be basically charging a unit to get it out of the way of another charging unit. If there is a rules problem with this, I'm sure someone will let me know. But I figure that it could open up some possibilities in the future, especially for little screening units and things like that. Things that I used to use a lot in 7th edition, but now are not so effective because of true line of sight. As you can see, my opponent, as I said, is charged into my Minotaurs with the BSB. I was sort of surprised by this because I was perfectly prepared to charge those Saurus at a future time, so I don't think he really needed to charge in and risk taking casualties from the Minotaurs, who are still good without having charged, although the Saurus are much worse when they are not using their spears to defend and they don't get the extra rank, which is unfortunate because obviously you have to pay for the spears and they don't get the parry bonus if they're using them. And then plus he charged through a forest, which makes him not steadfast, so if I do win the combat, then he will flee. But I think he did end up winning the combat on this one. I did not have enough attacks to really kill enough models to win, so he did win, but my Minotaur stayed around for that round. So here we go. This is a turn later. I believe this is going to be the beginning of turn 4 or something like that. As you can see, the skink units over there have been destroyed pretty easily by my Gores, but as they only represented about 100 points, it doesn't really matter. The Minotaurs and the BSB managed to break that Saurus unit but failed to run it down. But then I was able to charge it again. It did rally, and I was able to charge it again the next turn. I believe I had one failed charge in there, and the general tried to charge into my Beast Lord, but he also failed. As you can see, the Minotaurs over in the back there charged the Saurus again, and those were destroyed before they turned around and were ready to deal some damage on one of these Saurus units that's moving in, possibly the Temple Guard or the Saurus over in the center. As you can see, the Stegodon and his Scar Veteran buddy, the Scar Veteran is actually on a horned one, charged into those Gores and have been dealing some serious damage. Fortunately, the Gores, because they have so many ranks, have just been able to hold through that with their steadfast and stay stubborn. And they haven't really gotten many wounds off. I believe they've gotten 1 or 2 on the Stegodon, but that's not really important. Their job is basically to hold them up for as many rounds of combat as I can possibly make them do. So in my opponent's turn, my opponent had tried to charge the BSB, who was in combat with the Saurus, which are off screen at the moment, in order to get some pretty serious points from him. Unfortunately, the charge was quite a ways, and my opponent didn't end up rolling it, although if he had, it would have been some pretty serious points in his favor, because I have no doubt that those Temple Guard would have made short work of that lone Minotaur. But he did end up exploding that flank with the failed charge just enough for my Minotaurs to get around this building and charge into his Temple Guard. I thought this was a pretty cinematic scene, considering there's all these Minotaurs waving their enormous axes at the stalwart Temple Guard's flank over here. So things aren't looking too good for the Temple Guard. I did a serious number of casualties with the initial charge of the Minotaurs, which really, although the Temple Guard are stubborn and immune to psychology, it really hurt their chances of being able to do any damage back, which is where Minotaurs really fall down. They're just so weak that oftentimes the enemy can get a lot of combat res just by doing wounds to them. So fortunately, this flank charge allowed me to attack with relative impunity. So we're getting onto the late game now. I believe this is turn 5 or so. As you can see, my skirmishers moved into the woods to try to save themselves from the scary monsters that were lurking in the back there. The Scar Veteran and the Stegodon actually broke the unit of Gores, and the Scar Veteran was able to run them down. The Stegodon made a combat reform and was in a good position to charge a lot of my units, especially my casters and their raiders. So they ran into the forest. Unfortunately, they were charged right then by a unit of skinks, one of the units of skinks that had run away from my gore unit earlier. Which was something that I really hadn't considered, which was pretty silly for me, I guess. I really don't think about how many units could be threatening my lone characters and things, and a lot of times that reflects poorly in game because I'll just lose characters to stupid little mistakes like shooting from a unit of skirmishers or charging from one of these small flanking units. Unfortunately, though, the skinks are only skinks, so the ungors and the skinks are pretty well matched, considering there are more skinks than ungors, but the ungors have slightly more impressive stats. Unfortunately, one of my casters did lose a wound to a feedback scroll earlier, so that does make it easier for him to, if he just gets one of those wounds off of my caster, he can get a couple 100 points off of that unit just for rolling a high number. So I guess because it was the late game and I had a little bit of a head up over my opponent, I got a little bit cocky at this point until I realized that I had only killed one unit of Saurus and I believe one unit of Skinks, whereas my opponent had destroyed one entire unit of Gores and run them down. So we were actually very closely tied at this point. And the game couldn't really have gone either way. And I had a lot of points. Our BSB had taken several wounds, so I had a lot of points that were just waiting out here to be taken. Fortunately, though, my Minotaurs did get a couple good rounds of combat off, and they were able to destroy. They had to destroy because the unit was stubborn, and leadership 10 because the general had the standard of discipline. They had to destroy the entire Temple Guard unit, which they did eventually. It took them a couple turns, but they were able to do that and charge into the flank of the Stegodon here that had moved into position to charge one of my my units. They moved into position to charge this Stegodon, and were able to do some serious damage. They did kill it in one round of combat. As you can see there, there's a lot of wounds on the Stegodon. They killed the chief. Actually, no, sorry, they did not. They failed to kill the chief, but they did kill the Stegodon, and I believe they stomped the chief to death after the combat. As you can see, they have a Slann and a Saurus standard bearer in the back there to just remind me that I've taken a standard and killed the enemy general. So this was a bit of a lucky charge in there, and I was able to do enough wounds to kill off the Stegodon, which was really the difference between victory and defeat here. Because otherwise, that Stegodon would have done some pretty serious damage, either killing all of my casters or moving in and killing my Battle Standard Bearer. My Battle Standard Bearer and the general, after several turns, ended up killing the enemy, the Saurus unit they were fighting, which took them quite a bit of time. The Slann kept getting Shield of Thorns and Flesh of Stone because he was using Lore of Life on that unit, which helped a lot. I got a couple Wissen's Wild Forms going, but all that really helped was it helped my troops in that my opponent would need higher rolls to wound them, but it didn't help them in the strength department at all, considering I was fighting toughness 8 Saurus. So I really needed 1 or 2 6s to wound, and that just wouldn't come out of it. So unfortunately, those units had just taken a little longer than I had anticipated to kill off that Saurus unit, and I really needed the points from that Saurus unit to basically drag victory from the jaws of defeat. So here's the last turn of the game. As you can see, I pretty much wiped out almost all of my opponent's army, except for that lone little Scar veteran who's sitting in the back there. I just didn't have enough turns to charge him and kill him off. I think I could have done some pretty serious damage with my Beast Lord, but he did charge my Battle Standard Bearer, who's sitting in the back there, who's hiding to try to survive until the end of the game. He did charge into my Battle Standard Bearer and kill him in a round of combat. So my opponent did kill off my Battle Standard Bearer. He didn't get the extra points for killing it because he didn't overrun and charge it. My Battle Standard Bearer only had 1 wound left, so he only had to do 1 wound to kill him off. But he still got a pretty hefty sum of points. That the model is about 220 points, give or take, depending on how I run him. So that is a serious chunk of points. As you can see, my opponents also destroyed one of my Gore units and one of my Minotaur units. So it is by no means a shutout, even though I've destroyed most of my opponent's army. There were a couple things that I think we both could have done better. The first one was that my opponent's army was built to be very defensive. That's how I wrote the list. Unfortunately, he used it a little more offensively than I would have. I probably would have anchored one of my flanks on that building in the back there, and put my 2 Saurus units on the flanks of my big Temple Guard unit, and just used that solid wall to basically just weather whatever my opponent had to attack me with. But if my opponent had done that, I have no doubt that he would have won the game. That's a very powerful strategy with Lizardmen. But either way, it was a very enjoyable game, very close at the end there. I honestly thought for a while that I was going to lose the game, but a couple lucky rounds of combat did bring it back for me. So, there it is. Beastmen win again. Haha! Trevy the Great out on another battle report.